Hello and welcome to my home for another Cooks the Books. So the book is Tarts Anon, and it's this little guy here. It's from Australia. It's from a place in Melbourne called Tarts Anon. It's a bakery which specialises in tarts, obviously. And what I love about this book is that there is one kind of pastry for everything in the book. Every single tart, whether it's sweet, custard-based, cake-based, savoury, just one. You only have to learn how to do one pastry. I am going to make this, the chocolate and caramel tart. I just love me a little bit of chocolate and caramel, and this feels really achievable, so I'm gonna give it a go. Now, full disclosure, I filmed this whole recipe last week. I should have known at stage one that I just shouldn't have bothered because last week, everything went wrong. I cut my finger really badly on a mandolin, so I had to wear a glove. Then I forgot a bunch of stuff. I couldn't work out what was going on with my tin, but turns out I was using a tin that was 1 inch too big. What else happened? My condensed milk, I didn't take it far enough, so my dulce de leche was too blonde and didn't hold up. The top split, just everything went wrong that could go wrong. So let that be a lesson to us all. If it feels like today isn't a good day to bake, maybe you should just turn the oven off and go and read a book. So today, I'm doing it again, but I'm doing it right this time. Let's do this. I've already made, still a little bit warm actually, my tart case. Now, all I did there was I followed their instructions for their shortcrust pastry, which is based on a pâté brisé recipe, only they've reduced the butter content a little bit because they needed it to be a bit more robust, A, to allow for transporting the tarts all hither and thither, and B, because in true Australian style, they wanted everyone to be able to pick it up and eat it like a hand pie. And a too flaky or too delicate or too crumbly pastry, that just wouldn't allow for that. So hopefully I've done it justice. All I did was I got my 200 grams of plain flour along with 3 grams of sea salt. And then I added my 100 grams of chopped cold unsalted butter. And then I started the rubbing process. Now, if you've never made pastry by hand, you're just gonna pick up the butter and sort of smush it into the flour. And what you're trying to do here is to coat all the flour in the fat. And that's gonna create little air pockets, which when baked will create a lovely crumbly but robust pastry. Keep picking them up, smushing them between your fingertips, dropping them down. And what you're aiming for at this stage is a breadcrumb consistency. So it should look like fine breadcrumbs or even something like ground almonds. Next up, I had 50 grams of cold water. I added this a little bit at a time, just stirring with my fingertips in each addition. And you're aiming to get this to a sort of malleable but not wet consistency. So that's why you might do it a little bit at a time, you might not add it all. I then turned it out onto my worktop. I gave it the briefest of kneads, and I'm talking brief, I literally just smushed it together just to make it a bit smooth. And then I pushed it into a kind of puck shape with my fingertips, wrapped that in, I'm using a beeswax wrap, you could use cling film or something like that. And that just needs to go into the fridge for 30 minutes to rest and relax. Now there's lots of information about that shortcrust pastry in the book. As you'd imagine, because it's quite a special and important recipe in this book, they go into quite a lot of detail. So the first stage of the recipe is just the basic how-to, and then the second stage is a bit more granular. So it goes into a bit more depth about why you're doing certain things, why you should rest it for so long, why you should rest it twice. So after that first rest in the fridge, which is no less than half an hour, you need to take it out and roll it. Now, I would normally do this on a floured worktop with a floured rolling pin, but they recommend doing it between 2 sheets of greaseproof paper so that you're not adding any more dry ingredients. And I started by sort of smushing the pastry puck a little bit both ways with my rolling pin, and then rolling. So roll from the middle outwards. Never roll from the bottom to the top, always roll from the middle outwards, that way you're not stretching too much. And another thing they say to do is to peel back the paper on both sides to allow the pastry to unstick, and therefore you're not creating too much tension when you're rolling that could possibly stretch back in and shrink the pastry. So back to tins. Unlike the last week that I did it, where I used an 11-inch tin, the recipe is for a 10-inch, and I have a 10-inch tin, and I just popped that, once I thought I was about ready with my pastry, I just popped that on top just to make sure that it would go up the sides. And then the second rest happens. So with this one, they recommend that you refrigerate it and rest it for an hour in its flat form. And that way, if it is going to retract at all, it will do so in its flat form and not after you've shaped it, which can also prevent a little bit of shrinking. So once it's had an hour in the fridge resting, grab your tin back and peel off one of the sheets of greaseproof paper and then just gently lay that into the tin and then peel off the other piece of paper. And then you're gonna just tease the pastry into those corners really gently. You wanna be nice and careful here. You don't wanna tear the pastry at all. And then once it's into the bottom and the corners, you can just use your fingertips to pinch the sides and pinch the pastry into what they call the knuckles of the tin. Once all the pastry's in, it just needs a little trim because there is a bit of excess, so grab yourself a sharp paring knife and just trim up to the top of the tin. And then they say to rest it again for 10 or 15 minutes in the freezer. Then you can bring it out of the freezer and we're gonna blind bake this. So I have a piece of foil. I'm going to just tease that into the inside of my pastry. And then I'm using baking lentils. You can use baking beans, baking rice, baking whatevers. Just make sure that the whole tin is full and then wrap that foil around the whole thing. And then that gets baked at 180 degrees C in a fan assisted oven. They say for 30 minutes. Now actually, I put it in for 30, and this is what happened to me last week as well, actually. So I wasn't sure if it would happen again, but I put it in for half an hour, and then I peeked underneath the foil, and it just didn't seem cooked enough. It seemed a little bit raw. So I added another 10 minutes, and again, I had another look. I wasn't sure that it was gonna bake all the way through, so I took off the baking beans. They say to bake it throughout with the baking beans in. I didn't do that, and I think it's fine. It's worked out. I did the last 5 minutes naked and beanless, and it's come out all right. There's a little bit of shrinkage, but I think we're still good. It's a whole lot better than last week's one, let me tell you. So now that we have the tart case ready, I've dropped the oven temperature down to 125 degrees C, just a nice low temperature, and that's the temperature we're going to bake the rest of the tart. The first thing we're gonna do, so actually the very first thing I did, and this was the first thing that went wrong last week, but anyway, I made dulce de leche. Now, of course, you can buy dulce de leche, you can get it in jars, but I always like to make it myself because you have a bit more control, and I think the flavor's really nice. But last week, I just didn't take it far enough. I got impatient. I wanted to go to bed, you know, and it was a bit blonde, but this is lovely. This is really sort of tanned, and it's got a delicious flavor. I actually experimented with a couple of different brands. I did a supermarket owned brand, and this is a classic carnation. The supermarket owned brand had a better texture, but this one has a better flavor. So I'm going with better flavor, guys. Anyway, we have 270 grams of the dulce de leche. I'm just gonna add 2 grams of salt, that's sea salt, and I'm just gonna mix that through until it's really well combined. Did I mention how you make dulce de leche? Let's just go through it. Grab yourself a tin of condensed milk, and in a big saucepan, you want to boil lots of water. So bring it to the boil, pop your can in. The water needs to be at least like 1 or 2 centimeters above the top of the can. Drop it down to a simmer, then just let it bubble away. Making sure you're topping it up all the time with boiling water, because what you do not want is for that tin to be exposed in any way, because then there's a potential for pressure to build and explosions to happen. And let me tell you, it's never happened to me, but I can't imagine how annoying it is to clean up an explosion of dulce de leche. Anyway, do that for 4 to 6 hours. I did it for 6 and it tastes really good. And this is the caramel part of this tart. And I'm just going to pop it all into my tin and then just spread it out with a palette knife. So that just needs to hang out while you get on with making the chocolate custard. So this is a really simple custard. In the book, it requests whipping cream, which is about a 35–36% fat. Don't want to use single cream, but you could use double cream if you wanted to. It just mean it would probably set a bit thicker and be a lot richer. So I've got 560 grams of whipping cream. I'm gonna put that into a saucepan. I'm gonna add 3 grams of sea salt and 65 grams of caster sugar. Just give that a little mix to help it on its way, and then set that over a medium heat to warm through. We're aiming to get this to an almost boil, so not quite boiling. Meanwhile, grab your egg yolks. So I've got 240 grams of egg yolks here. That ended up for me being between 13 and 14 large eggs. You can sometimes find egg yolks in a carton if you're really lucky, or if you couldn't, like me, you can save your egg whites. I just portioned it up into little bags and labeled them with whatever the weight they were. That way I can use them for things like Swiss meringue buttercream and meringues and things like that. Anywho, I'm just breaking those egg yolks up with a whisk, and then when the cream mixture reaches the right temperature, so almost boiling point, take it off the heat, pour a little bit of that hot mixture onto the eggs, and that's going to temper the eggs so we don't scramble them. Give that a whisk through and then start pouring the rest of the cream in. Once it's all in, you can grab your chocolate chips. Now I've got 145 grams of dark chocolate chips, 70% cocoa. I've cut that up into really small bits, and I'm going to start melting that by just putting a little bit of that hot custard mixture on top of the chocolate and then whisk it to melt and combine before putting the rest of the custard mixture on and whisking it. And just to make it really smooth and shiny, I'm just giving it a little blast with a hand blender, as per the recipe. So I've got my chocolate custard, which I've blended. I'm going to just decant it into another jug, and I think this might just help get rid of a few air bubbles. I'm going to pour this into my tin. So I'm going to put half in here, and then I'm going to transport it over to the oven and do the rest there, just so that I don't spill it all. So that's now baking at 125 degrees C, which is a nice low oven. And I've set the timer for 25 minutes. The recipe says 30, but last week, of course I overbaked it because everything was going wrong. So I'm just gonna have a look at it, give it a little wobble, because what we want is for the center to be wobbly. And the trick really is to take it out a bit before you think it's gonna be ready. So a little bit on the wobblier side. So I'm going to check it at 25 minutes, add a minute at a time after that, and just keep wobbling it just to make sure I don't overdo it this time. Well, it's finished, and it definitely looks a lot better than the last one I made. Oh, there it is, coming at you. The first test is, can I hold it like a hand pie? Yes. Now the second test is, does it taste any good? Oh yeah. First thing to say is, I'm really glad I followed the advice in the book and didn't put it in the fridge, because there's something very wonderful about a room temperature custard-based tart. I've always put them in the fridge, but they do tend to firm up, especially chocolate ones. It's really light and so smooth and so lovely and rich, but without being overpowering. The caramel, I wish it could be a little bit less oozy, a little bit on the drippy side, but you can see the texture of it all. That custard is so, so smooth. I think the pastry could be a little bit shorter, and maybe that's my fault, but I like that I can pick it up. And it does have a really pleasant buttery flavour, but it's not taking anything away from the filling, because so often, if you make a sweet pastry, it can kind of make everything taste a little bit too much, but this is really nicely balanced. It's almost like it's just there to be a vessel for like the delicious filling, and it's just so nice. This worked out really, really well. I'm really glad I did it. Tarts Anon. Get yourself a copy. There are so many lovely recipes in here. If custard tarts are your thing, it's probably about 2/3 custard and 1/3 like cake-based tarts. In this recipe book, there are really delicious cake-based tarts. For example, this one's a nice one, the ube and coconut one, which has got a beautiful sort of lilac colour to it. There is a carrot cake tart. There's a burnt butter banana one, which is another cake-based one. This is one I really want to make, the rice pudding. So that's another one for my list of tarts to try. I just think this is a great book. The photography is stunning. It's all about the tarts. Like, there's barely any styling at all, which is just so refreshing. Sometimes it's just all a bit fussy and you think, well, I can't achieve that. Whereas I just bake a tart and make it look fit. So thank you so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed this book. One thing I would say about this particular recipe is personally, the timings were a little bit off, and that could just be a commercial oven to domestic oven lost in translation thing. Could just be my oven, but I found I had to bake not only the tart case for longer, I also feel like I had to cook the custard for a good 10 minutes extra because it was really, really wobbly because I didn't want it to be overcooked like I did last week. I took it out a little bit earlier than I thought I would and it was actually quite wobbly. It's set really nicely now, but even that was like an extra 10 minutes. My tips would just be don't go by, and I always say this anyway, don't go by just the printed guidelines of how long to bake a thing. Like use your judgment, use your senses, use your eyes, your smell to get it right for you, because every oven is different. I really hope you give it a go. It is delicious and I'm really glad I got the opportunity to share it with you, and I'll be back with another one of these soon, so watch this space. Until then, I'm going to finish the rest of my tart. Ciao for now.